He was supposed to be in Geneva, but the summit ended early. And when billionaire Victor Armand returned to the Valhalla Ridge Dome, he found the world's most expensive engine dying at 90 seconds. And in that silence, a janitor's daughter reached for her grandfather's cracked stethoscope. The wind over Iceland's northern ridge was a hymn of its own, low, endless, and cold enough to gnaw through bone. Against that frozen choir, the Valhalla Ridge Energy Dome rose like a cathedral of glass and steel. Its curved roof caught the pale shimmer of the aurora, casting ribbons of green light across the snowfields. From a distance, it did not look like a laboratory. It looked like a shrine, built not to honor a god but to trap a star. Inside, silence ruled. Engineers in white coats stood at their consoles, their reflections faint against the giant observation glass. They spoke in murmurs, but mostly they waited. At the heart of the dome rested the Lyra Delta fusion lattice, a machine meant to be the first of its kind, a lattice heart capable of sustained fusion, a sun bound by human hands. The moment Victor Armand entered, the silence thickened. He was not a tall man, nor the youngest, but he carried himself with the weight of an empire. His suit, a steel-gray tailored coat, gleamed faintly under the overhead lights. Victor's presence drew the engineers taut, as if the air itself had been wound like a spring. He was not here to bless. He was here to demand. "Bring it alive," Victor said, and his voice rolled across the hall like an edict. The consoles flickered. Warning sirens pulsed in steady rhythm, as if the dome itself had begun to breathe. The Lyra Delta hummed, then roared, a sound like a giant organ pipe filling with fire. The monitors marked each second. 10, 25, 40. The engineers leaned forward, sweat forming on brows despite the cold air. Victor's eyes stayed on the numbers. He whispered, though the dome carried his words to all corners. "This is the moment the world bends." At 70 seconds, the hum became a shriek. Steel trembled in resonance. The fusion core's light throbbed red against the glass, a heartbeat too wild to control. Fingers raced across keyboards, alarms screamed. 85, 89, and then a single gasp of silence. The machine's roar collapsed into nothing, like a beast strangled mid-breath. The monitors turned black. 90 seconds. Dead again. The dome groaned as metal cooled. Engineers froze as if carved into statues. Some closed their eyes. Some simply stared at the floor. Victor clenched his fist. His face did not redden. His rage was cold. He turned on the assembly, his voice sharper than the wind outside. 90 seconds! 17 failures! And you dare call yourselves engineers? You cannot even hold a star for a single heartbeat longer! Nobody answered. Nobody moved. Victor's lips curved into a smile that had no warmth. $300 million. Whoever solves it, claims it. Whoever does not, leaves. Every one of you. The words struck like a hammer. The Valhalla Ridge no longer felt like a cathedral. It felt like a tribunal of ice, where silence was guilt and fear was law. In a corner of the hall, a mop dragged across the white floor. The sound was soft, almost tender, and yet it echoed after Victor's command. There she was, Lucia Morales. Her hair, once black, had silvered at the edges. Her face was lined, not by years alone, but by nights spent scrubbing until dawn. The harsh detergent had cracked her hands until they bled. Still, she folded her cloth neatly after each pass, always into 2 even squares. It was her ritual of dignity, her way of staying whole. Lucia did not belong among machines or billionaires. She belonged to the unseen world, night shifts, unpaid bills, the lingering shadow of hospital corridors where treatments had ended too soon. The only reason she was still here, mopping the floor of a dome that tried to summon a son, was debt, the kind no mother can ignore when her child is waiting at home. Victor noticed her. For the first time, he turned his fury on someone who was not an engineer. "Even the janitor witnesses your disgrace," he spat. Lucia lowered her gaze. She said nothing. The insult pierced, but she had endured worse storms than words. Her thoughts drifted instead to the one waiting for her outside, the girl who clutched a patched bear, who should have been asleep but never slept until she knew her mother was safe. Victor's voice cut again, cold as sleet. "If this machine does not rise, then neither you nor your daughter will remain. Consider yourselves dismissed, both of you." The words landed heavier than any stone. Lucia's chest tightened, but her hands continued their ritual. She folded the cloth once, twice. Her quiet defiance was not resistance, but survival. Dignity, even in exile. And yet, beyond the hall, in a small waiting room lit only by a vending machine's glow, a pair of ears had heard everything. Sophia Morales pressed her patched bear to her chest. She was 10 years old, but her eyes carried the stillness of someone older. She did not tremble. She listened. Where others heard only noise, the metallic howl of a dying fusion engine, she heard patterns, hidden notes, the faint cries that steel makes before it breaks. From her bag, she pulled a relic, her grandfather's stethoscope. The tubing was cracked, the brass dulled, but when she lifted it to her ear, it carried a strange intimacy, as if the world leaned closer. Her grandfather had been a rail worker in the snowfields of the north. He had taught her to press the scope against the iron and wait. "Metal has memory," he used to say. "If you are patient, it will whisper before it falls." Now, as the dome's silence weighed down the night, his words returned to her. Sophia set the scope against her patched bear, as if to ask it a secret. The bear, worn and stitched too many times to count, seemed to nod in silent agreement. Back in the hall, Victor continued his tirade. Engineers avoided his gaze. Lucia folded her rag again, and Sophia, in her quiet corner, realized something no machine could reveal, no software could compute. She turned to her mother when the shouting subsided. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the dome more surely than Victor's billions. "Mama," she said, "you cannot fix it, but I can." Thus the first crack of light entered the frozen cathedral. Not from Victor Armand, who commanded wealth like a storm. Not from the engineers, bound by equations they could not bend, but from a child, carrying a broken stethoscope and the memory of a grandfather's lesson. The machine had failed at 90 seconds, yet something far more enduring had just begun. The dome did not sleep. Even when the machine was silent, its walls carried the faint hum of power, a restlessness in the circuits. Under the cold neon lights, the engineers dispersed in clusters, whispering with lowered voices, their pride bruised, their contracts trembling. For them, failure was professional. For Lucia Morales, standing with her mop and bucket, failure was personal, her child's life tied to every word from Victor Armand's mouth. Lucia kept her ritual. She folded the rag into 2 perfect squares before tucking it into the pail. It was habit, yes, but also a way of remembering she was still human, not just a shadow wandering through other people's triumphs and humiliations. Victor had not left the hall. He lingered, pacing, the soles of his shoes striking the floor with clipped precision. His anger did not fade with silence. It sharpened. He wanted the world to see him conquer the sun, and instead, the world had seen him fail at 90 seconds. His gaze slid again toward Lucia. She tried to shrink into the periphery, into the neon glow where cleaners were not meant to be noticed. But this time, the glare found her like a searchlight. "You," Victor said, his voice echoing off steel and glass. "Do you enjoy sweeping up after failure? Does it give you satisfaction to mop away the ashes of history?" Lucia's lips parted, but no words came. She had no right to speak in this cathedral of engineers. She lowered her eyes, her silence more eloquent than defense. Victor stepped closer. His shadow swallowed her slight frame. "Understand me. If this machine cannot rise, neither will you. Neither will your daughter. Consider your place here borrowed and the debt already called." The words fell colder than the Icelandic night. Lucia bowed her head. She did not beg. She folded the rag again, square upon square, the way her mother once folded linens in a village far from here. Pride could be bent, but not erased. And still, she felt the sting. Not for herself, but for the child waiting outside the glass door. Beyond the hall, Sophia sat cross-legged on the floor, her patched bear nestled against her shoulder. The vending machine buzzed beside her, casting pale blue light across her face. She had listened to everything. Children were not meant to understand the cruel words of billionaires, but Sophia was no ordinary child. She had listened to iron before. She had listened to the sighs of broken pipes in their tiny apartment, to the tremor of subway rails when her mother's shifts ended before dawn. She knew the language of hidden fractures. Her fingers found the stethoscope in her bag. She ran her thumb over the cracks in its tubing, over the dull shine of brass that had once gleamed in her grandfather's hand. The old man had taught her not to fear silence. "In silence," he said, "the truth speaks the clearest." Now silence reigned inside the dome, and Sophia could still hear it. That faint, swallowed cry that had lived beneath the roar of the Lyra Delta. A high note, almost too thin for human ears. But hers had caught it, and it had not been the sound of fire, it had been the sound of pain. She rose, her bear under one arm, the stethoscope in the other. Inside the dome, the tension broke when a firm voice entered the hall. "Enough!" It was Dr. Anika Rao, Inspector of the International Energy Commission. She walked with a calm authority, the kind earned not from shouting, but from knowing no one in the room could overrule her. Her dark eyes swept across the engineers, then toward Victor himself. "This is not a marketplace of wagers," she said. "Every test of the Lyra Delta is a recorded experiment under international regulation. If there is to be a next attempt, it will be conducted under my watch and by the book." Victor turned to her with his rehearsed smile, the smile that had disarmed senators and rivals alike. But Dr. Rao was not moved. She returned the gaze with a stillness that reminded him of glaciers, ancient, immovable, unmoved by storms. For the first time that evening, Victor did not reply, and into that pause came a smaller voice. It was Sophia, standing just inside the door, her patched bear clutched tight. The engineers startled at the sight of a child in their sanctum. Victor frowned, ready to order her out, but the girl spoke before he could. "My mother cannot fix it," Sophia said. Her words were quiet, but the dome carried them far. "But I can." The room stilled. Engineers glanced at each other, some with pity, some with curiosity. Victor let out a sharp laugh. "You?" he scoffed. "You are what, 10? Do you think a toy stethoscope can mend harmonic collapse?" Sophia did not flinch. She raised the instrument. "It is not a toy. It belonged to my abuelo. He taught me to listen to metal. And I heard something your machines did not." The silence grew heavier. Even Victor hesitated, for arrogance thrived in ridicule, But there was something in the child's eyes, an unwavering calm, that unsettled him. Dr. Rao broke the silence first. "If she makes a claim, it must be documented," she said. "Every observation, every test, no exceptions." Victor turned on her. "You cannot be serious." "I am," Dr. Rao replied. "Our protocols exist for all voices, not only those who sit on the payroll." The engineers shifted uneasily. For them, the thought was absurd. And yet some felt a strange flicker. Hope, perhaps, that an answer could come from where no one had looked. Lucia stood frozen, her hands still on the mop handle. She wanted to stop her daughter, to protect her from the scorn of powerful men. But the child's eyes met hers, and in them she saw her father's stubbornness, the same man who once placed a stethoscope in a little girl's palm and told her to trust what others could not hear. Lucia's heart broke with pride and fear all at once. Sophia stepped further into the neon glow. "I only need a chance," she said simply. "One chance to listen." The hall, which had moments before held the arrogance of wealth and the despair of failure, now held something else entirely. It held the fragile beginning of belief that in the ruins of 90 seconds, in the silence after the roar, a child's ear might uncover what a billion-dollar empire had missed. And so, under the neon lights of Valhalla Ridge, the janitor's daughter became visible. The dome still carried the scent of failure. 90 seconds. 17 times, engraved into the silence like a verdict. Engineers lingered in clusters, whispering equations, avoiding the gaze of Victor Armand. It was Dr. Anika Rao who steadied the room. She laid her clipboard on the console and spoke with calm precision. "We will log the child's observation. One ignition, no longer than 7 seconds. Every channel recorded raw. No filters, no thresholds raised without my signature." Her tone left no space for debate. Even Victor, who stood near the observation glass with his hands buried in his coat pockets, did not object. Not yet. Lucia Morales clutched her mop handle, her folded rag resting in the bucket like a prayer. She wanted to hide her daughter, to shield her from the sharp stares of billionaires and engineers. But Sophia stepped forward, patched bare in one arm, her grandfather's stethoscope in the other. "Where will you listen?" Dr. Rao asked. "The cooling throat," Sophia answered. "That is where the metal talks." A murmur rippled. Victor laughed under his breath. 7 seconds, maestro. Let us hear your concerto." But the girl only closed her eyes and pressed the cold brass bell of the stethoscope to the machine. 0-1. "Prepare to ignite," said Dr. Rao. The dome hushed. Then, the low organ hum of the Lyra Delta returned, swelling like a tide. 1 second. 2. The air thickened. Engineers leaned toward their screens. "Note 1 is smooth," Sophia whispered. "No scrape." At 3 seconds, she flinched. A thin, high ping cut through the roar, so faint it vanished before anyone else noticed. "There," she said quickly. "A small cry. High, buried. Your filters hide it." Technicians frowned, scrolling through traces. Nothing obvious appeared. Dr. Rao's eyes stayed on the child. "Where?" she asked. "The throat fasteners," Sophia said. "Something tired. Not fire, but metal remembering a crack." At 5 seconds, Dr. Rao raised her hand. "Enough! Cut and cool." The machine fell silent again, but the silence had changed. It was no longer defeat. It was waiting. The monitors replayed the trace, and there it was, a wick-thin spike at 3.9 seconds, then again at 4.7. Almost invisible, masked by the roar. Without the child's warning, the software would have discarded it as noise. An engineer muttered, "If the gate had been lower," and stopped when Dr. Rao looked his way. Victor demanded, What does it mean? It means, Dr. Rao replied, that something in your lattice mount is singing. A microscopic fracture that grows into a cascade. 90 seconds is not magic. It is resonance. Sophia hugged her bear and added softly, a whisper learning to shout. For the first time that night, the engineers leaned forward with more than fear. They leaned forward with hope. Dr. Rao signed the raw printouts, sealed them in an archive envelope, and handed them to a runner. We will inspect the well throat with fiber optics and thermal imaging, and we will audit every sensor threshold. If hands have adjusted them, I will know. Her words hung in the dome like frost. Several faces tightened. Victor's jaw set hard, but Lucia only bent and folded her rag into 2 perfect squares. She looked at her daughter, this small voice of metal, and knew that for the first time, the dome was listening. The dome slept for the first time in months. After the brief ignition, the great machine cooled, its casing exhaling faint wisps of vapor like a beast lulled to rest. Engineers had gone quiet, some buried in data, some pacing like men shaken from a dream. But in a corner, on a small stool too low for the grandeur of the hall, Sophia Morales sat with her patched bear and her stethoscope. Her eyes were closed, but she was not asleep. She was traveling backward toward another winter, another hum of metal. It was 3 years earlier, in a town no mapmaker cared to mark bold. Snow lay heavy on the rail yard, smothering the tracks until they looked like lines scratched in white glass. Sophia's grandfather, her abuelo, stood with his wool cap pulled low and his breath rising like smoke. His hands were scarred from a lifetime of work with bolts, gears, and steel hearts that never lied. He handed her the stethoscope that day. She was 7, small enough that the earpieces slid awkwardly, but he adjusted them with patient fingers. Do not be afraid of silence, he told her. Silence is when the truth finally speaks. She pressed the brass chest piece to a rail. At first she heard nothing but her own pulse. Then, faintly, a hum. Not steady but restless, like a voice that wanted to be noticed. What is it saying? She whispered. Abuelo smiled, snow dusting his beard. That it remembers every train that ever passed. Each wheel, each weight. Metal carries memory. It does not forget the day it was struck too hard, or the night it froze too long. When it speaks, you must listen, not with ears only, but with skin, with patience. Sophia bent her head lower, letting the cold sting her cheek against the rail. The hum deepened, became a story. She imagined trains that had thundered here before her birth. The sorrow of steel bent, the relief when bolts were tightened just in time. Why do you listen, Abuelo? Because if you do, you can save lives, he said simply. A crack whispers before it screams, and if you hear it, you mend it. You keep the world whole. He placed her hand over the stethoscope. This tool is simple, but it teaches the oldest truth. Before you command, you must listen. Now, inside Valhalla Ridge, Sophia's small fingers traced that same stethoscope. The brass was colder here, dulled by years, but it carried the warmth of memory. She thought of her grandfather's voice, the way he had crouched to her level so she could believe she belonged in the world of steel. Dr. Rao approached quietly, not wanting to disturb. What are you remembering? She asked. Sophia opened her eyes. A rail yard. Snow. My grandfather taught me that metal has memory. Dr. Rao studied the child with a gaze that weighed and measured. He was right. That is why we study fatigue, resonance, microfractures. Science only gives formal names to what craftsmen have always known. Victor Armand, listening from a distance, rolled his eyes but said nothing. Yet even he felt the shift in the room. The engineers no longer dismissed the girl, They leaned closer, not for orders, but for a story they had forgotten how to hear. Lucia moved nearer, her folded rag still in hand. Her voice was soft, as if afraid to shatter the fragile calm. "Your abuelo would be proud tonight, Sophia." The girl rested her head briefly against her mother's side. "He told me to listen with skin. I think that is why I hear what the machines cannot." Dr. Rao bent to meet her eye level. "You have given us a thread to follow. Tomorrow we will shine light inside the throat of the machine. But tonight, it is enough that you reminded us to listen." The child nodded. She lifted her bear, tucking the stethoscope against its patched belly, as though sharing the memory with her oldest friend. Outside, the aurora rippled again, green silk draped across a black sky. Inside, the dome glowed faintly, a cathedral after a service, the echoes lingering long after words have ended. For the first time, Lucia felt the weight ease from her chest. Not gone, but lighter. Her daughter had stood before power and spoken, not with defiance, but with listening. And the world, for once, had listened back. Sophia closed her eyes, hearing in the stillness not the roar of machines but the hum of a rail in winter, and the voice of a man who had believed in her before anyone else. Metal remembers, and so did she. Morning broke pale and silver across Reykjavik. The sea wind blew hard against the dome, rattling its glass as if to test whether the walls could still hold secrets. Inside, the engineers gathered again, their faces drawn but awake with a kind of restless hope. On the great screen, the night's recordings were ready to be replayed. Dr. Anika Rao stood at the center with her clipboard, as steady as a lighthouse. She gave a single nod. "Begin." The data unfurled. Seconds stretched across the screen like a frozen river. At first, the lines were thick with the ordinary roar of ignition, harmonics stacked in layers, a storm of numbers. But then the technicians magnified the trace around the mark Sophia had named. There it was, thin as a thread of glass. A single spike at 3.9 seconds, another at 4.7. Barely more than a hair's width on the graph, so fine it could have been dismissed as random noise. Yet when the engineers stared at it, silence spread through the hall. Sophia stood close to her mother, her patched bear tucked under her arm. She pointed with a small finger. "That is the voice I heard. A ping hidden under the roar." An engineer zoomed in again. The line sharpened, jagged, undeniable. He whispered almost to himself, "High-frequency resonance. Not plasma. Structure." Victor Armand's jaw tightened. "So, every machine has noise." Dr. Rao turned her gaze on him. "Noise that repeats is no longer noise. It is a signal, and this one repeats." Another technician overlaid the thermal data from the test. At first, the image glowed blue, cool as ice. But right where the spike had appeared, a faint red filament lit the throat of the cooling well, thin as a strand of hair. Lucia covered her mouth with her hand. Even she, with no training in physics, understood what it meant. A wound in the machine's heart. "Show the fasteners," Dr. Rao ordered. The fiber-optic camera threaded into the throat, bending like a lantern snake. The image appeared on the screen. Steel bolts lined in a circle, shining dully under the light. For a moment, all looked whole. Then on one bolt near the base, a hairline crack revealed itself, a scratch so fine it seemed to vanish if the light shifted. "There," Sophia said. "That is where the voice lives." The hall erupted with murmurs. Engineers rushed closer, scribbling notes. One veteran wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. We chased software ghosts for months, he muttered. And it was a bolt, a single-tired bolt. Dr. Rao raised her pen. Not only a bolt, a pattern. If one carries a flaw, others may follow. Batch Q17 will be audited in full. At those words, a shadow crossed the room. Some engineers shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting toward the CTO who stood stiff at the edge of the group. His lips pressed thin, but he said nothing. Victor, however, forced a smile. Fine. You have found a crack. Replace it. Tighten it. Move on. We do not stop an empire for a hairline. No, Dr. Rao said. Her voice was quiet, but the dome carried it. We stop an empire when it hides a hairline. This is not just fatigue. This is evidence. For the first time, Victor's smile faltered. Sophia stepped closer to the screen, her bear dangling from one arm. She tilted her head, listening not with ears now, but with memory. The bolt was screaming, she said. Only no one wanted to hear. You made the filters too high so the scream would vanish. Her words fell like stones into water. Ripples spread through the hall, questions, doubts, a deep unease. Dr. Rao set down her clipboard. Prepare a torque test with adjusted thresholds and seal the logs. This is now official record. She looked down at Sophia. Thank you. Without your ears, this wound would have killed the machine again and again. Sophia pressed her bear to her chest. Metal only wanted someone to listen. And in that moment, even the proudest engineer believed her. The dome was colder the next morning, though perhaps it was only the mood of the people inside. A storm pressed against the glass, scattering snow across the ridge, but it was nothing compared to the storm building in the hall. The engineers prepared the inspection. Fiber optic scopes lay coiled like patient serpents, and the thermal imaging rig hummed as it warmed. Dr. Anika Rao oversaw everything, her pen clipped neatly to her clipboard, her gaze steady as stone. At the center of the hall, the Lyra Delta stood silent, the world's most expensive heart, betrayed by a hairline scar. Begin, Dr. Rao commanded. The scopes slid into the cooling throat. On the main screen, the bolts appeared, their threads shining like teeth under pale light. Most looked unblemished, but then the camera reached the bolt Sophia had named. There it was, a thin red line in the thermal overlay, bright as a wound. The crack ran along the metal, shallow but unmistakable. An audible gasp passed through the hall. Microfracture, said one engineer, his voice unsteady. Right at the load-bearing seam, hidden under the torque. Another shook his head. If it propagated under harmonic stress, cascade failure in under 2 minutes. Every time. Dr. Rao did not flinch. Log the coordinates, extract the bolt. The technicians worked carefully, hands trembling as they loosened the flawed fastener. When it came free, they placed it on a tray under a lens. Magnified on the screen, the fracture looked like a frozen river branching across steel. Sophia stepped closer. She set her patched bear on the console beside her, almost like a witness. She touched the scope's screen lightly, tracing the line with her finger. The crack remembers, she said softly. Every second it carried more than it should. Her words silenced the room. The engineers, hardened by years of equations and failures, felt the weight of what they saw, not only a defect, but a story of neglect. Dr. Rao moved to the sensor desk. She asked for the logs from the last 3 trials. Pages of numbers scrolled by, timestamp after timestamp. But her eyes caught something others had missed. The acoustic thresholds had been raised, line by line, in increments small enough to slip past notice. She circled the values with her pen. Who adjusted these? No one answered. She looked at the CTO. He stood rigid, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the floor. "These changes were manual," she said. "Not automatic." Still silence. "Batch Q17, she continued, was supplied with fasteners already prone to microfracture. The data was there, but the thresholds were lifted so the system would not complain. You silenced the metal." A heavy truth fell over the dome. Engineers exchanged glances, some with anger, some with shame. Victor Armand broke the silence with a laugh, sharp and brittle. "So what? A single batch, a single bolt? Replace it and move on. Do not act as though a minor adjustment is a crime." Dr. Rao turned on him, her voice like ice breaking. "It is a crime when lives are risked, when oversight is deceived, when truth is buried under profit. The machine could have been lost. Worse, people could have been lost. This is not a flaw. This is a choice." Victor's smile faltered, but he said nothing more. The bolt, scarred and small, lay on its tray under the harsh light. Sophia picked up her stethoscope as if to listen to it one last time. She pressed the bell against the cracked steel, eyes closed. For a moment, she seemed to hear something no one else could. Then she opened her eyes. It wanted to hold on, but it was alone. Lucia touched her daughter's shoulder, pride and sorrow tangled together. "Not anymore," she whispered. The hall was silent, every engineer watching the girl, every one of them aware that the dome would never again ignore such a voice. Dr. Rao closed her clipboard. "This crack will be remembered, and so will the ones who tried to bury it." Outside, the storm pressed harder against the glass, snow swirling like restless ghosts. Inside, a single truth stood clear. Metal remembers, and so does justice. Snow had drifted high against the glass walls of the dome. Outside was white silence. Inside was the hush of a workshop after confession, every engineer subdued by the truth that a child's ear had uncovered. The cracked bolt lay on its tray like a relic, its wound glimmering faintly under the light. Dr. Anika Rao had ordered the inspection logged, sealed, and signed. The evidence of tampered thresholds was undeniable now. Yet the dome still had a machine to save. They could not stop at finding a wound. They had to decide how to heal it. Victor Armand stood apart, his arms folded, impatience written in every line of his jaw. "Enough staring at broken parts. I do not pay for funerals. I pay for power. Replace it, tighten it, and start the reactor again." No one moved. Sophia's small voice entered the silence. "Tightening it harder will only break it sooner." Every head turned. She stood with her patched bear under one arm, her grandfather's stethoscope swinging lightly from her other hand. She looked not at Victor, but at the engineers, as if they were her true audience. "My abuelo told me," she said slowly, "that sometimes you make steel stronger by giving it something softer. A sleeve, a cushion, like wrapping a bruise. The metal needs a friend, not more force." The engineers exchanged uncertain glances. A young one whispered, "A copper sleeve." Another frowned, "But copper is softer." "Yes," Sophia said, catching the word. "Soft to be strong. If the bolt sings because the steel is too sharp against itself, then a softer sleeve will change the song. And if you tighten less, the bolt can breathe without cracking." Dr. Rao leaned her pen against her chin, considering. "A copper lining," she repeated, "thin enough not to alter the geometry, but enough to absorb the micro-resonance. And a revised torque, lower than specification, to prevent overstress." One veteran engineer nodded slowly. "It could dampen the cascade, a bandage for the harmonic." Victor scoffed. "We are not surgeons. We do not bandage engines." "No," Dr. Rao replied, her voice quiet but firm. "But we do listen. And right now, the best idea in this hall belongs to a 10-year-old child. For a moment, even the storm outside seemed to pause. They set to work. Copper sheets were cut into rings, polished until they gleamed like coins under firelight. The bolts were reseated with those thin sleeves, each wrapped carefully as if clothing a wound. Torque wrenches clicked softer this time, no longer crushing, but cradling. Lucia watched from the edge, her rag folded neatly in her pocket, her hands clasped tight. She saw how the engineers, once so proud and distant, now moved with humility, as if they had been reminded of something older than science. Care. Sophia placed her bear on the workbench beside the copper sleeves. Its patched belly leaned against the shining rings, as if the bear, too, approved of this gentler strength. Dr. Rao oversaw each step, initialing the logs as the torque settings were recorded. "Document every adjustment," she instructed. "This will become precedent, not improvisation." Hours passed. At last, the last bolt was set, the last sleeve in place. The Lyra Delta stood ready again, its heart dressed not in brute force, but in patience. Victor broke the silence. "So, we have dressed it in copper bandages and prayers. Will it stand at 91 seconds? Dr. Rao ignored the bite in his words. She turned to Sophia. "What do you think?" The girl pressed her stethoscope lightly against the casing. She closed her eyes. For a moment she only breathed. Then she nodded. "It feels calmer," she said. "Like the voice has a friend." Her words carried more weight than any calculation that day. The engineers returned to their stations. Fingers hovered over controls. Breath misted in the cold air. Lucia folded her rag once, twice, her ritual before every storm. And the dome waited, not for arrogance or wagers, but for the soft strength of copper and the steady courage of a child's listening. The dome was hushed as though it sensed the gravity of what was coming. Outside, snow piled against the glass, dulling the aurora into a faint green haze. Inside, every light burned steady, consoles alive, eyes fixed. The engineers had prepared for this moment like monks before a ritual, their tools sharpened, their logs ready, their fear restrained by discipline. At the heart of the hall, Lyra Delta stood once more, rebuilt, reborn, its bolts now seated with copper sleeves, its seams tightened not with brute force, but with care. The machine looked the same, yet those who had touched it knew it was different, as though a wound had been bound by gentler hands. Victor Armand prowled the edge of the room, his coat whispering with each stride. He had demanded triumph, but what stirred in his chest now was something less familiar. Doubt. Dr. Anika Rao raised her clipboard. Her voice was calm, carrying across the chamber like a bell. "Test ignition. Protocol log begins. We proceed by the book. No filters, no hidden thresholds. The machine will tell us the truth, and the truth will stand." The engineers nodded in unison. The hall filled with the low hum of readiness, fingers at keyboards, eyes on dials, pens poised. Lucia held her folded rag against her chest like a rosary. Beside her, Sophia hugged her patched bear, the stethoscope looped loosely around her neck. Her small face was pale but serene, as if she were listening to something already unfolding in her mind. 0 - 1 minute, Dr. Rao called. "Prepare ignition." The dome seemed to draw breath. Then, with the strike of a command, the Lyra Delta awoke. The floor trembled. A low hum climbed into a roar, the sound of a star being coaxed into flesh and steel. Light bled from the lattice, red at first, then glowing with shades of gold. 10 seconds. 25. 40. The engineers' eyes darted, their pens scratching, every number checked twice. At 70 seconds, the dome always grew restless. Resonance built like a storm, and fear sharpened. But tonight, the copper sang its softer song. The vibration steadied, the roar balanced, as if the machine had found new footing. 85, someone whispered. The old dread returned. 90 was near. Lucia gripped the rag harder, her knuckles white. An engineer muttered a prayer in Icelandic. 89, the control desk called. The room froze. Monitors flickered, awaiting their verdict. 90. The sound deepened but did not collapse. The screens stayed lit. The hum did not fall into silence. Then came the impossible. 91. The dome did not die. It roared steady, a living sun held captive by human hands. A cry rose from the engineers, half disbelief, half relief. Some shouted, some laughed, some simply wept where they stood. After months of failure, the 91st second was a miracle. Time rolled on. 2 minutes, 5, 10. The graphs climbed and then leveled, green lines holding steady like calm seas. The machine had not only survived, it had stabilized. Victor stood still, his face pale in the light of his own dream, finally breathing. For once, words deserted him. He looked at the child, the bear, the old stethoscope, symbols unworthy of this cathedral, yet the very things that had saved it. Sophia opened her eyes, pressing the scope lightly to the casing. She smiled faintly. "It is happy now," she said. Lucia's tears spilled, silent and unashamed. She folded the rag once more, twice more, her ritual complete, her dignity unbroken. Dr. Rao lifted her pen, her voice steady but thick with something rarely heard in her tone. Reverence. Record entry. Time, 91 seconds and beyond. Status, sustained. The dome had been a place of humiliation and threat. Tonight, it became a place of healing. And in that fragile, triumphant silence, the world changed. The dome smelled of ozone and warm steel. 10 minutes had passed, then 15, and still the Lyra Delta pulsed steady, a star humming inside its glass cathedral. The engineers had wept, shouted, and fallen silent again, exhausted by wonder. Victor Armand finally stepped forward. His shoes clicked against the polished floor, sharp in the hush. He turned to the crowd, his voice pitched to carry like the chorus of a sermon. $300 million, he declared. As promised, the one who solved it has earned it. The engineers stirred. No one knew where to look, at the child clutching a patched bear, at the mother who folded rags with quiet dignity, or at the billionaire who now posed as a benefactor. Victor gestured broadly, his tone growing more theatrical. And more. The debts of this family, wiped clean. Medical, personal, all of it. Armand Nova Energies pays in full. Lucia's knees weakened. For a moment she had to grip the mop handle just to steady herself. Debt had been a chain around her neck for years, each hospital bill another weight dragging her down. Now, with a single sentence, Victor had cut it loose. Tears blurred her sight. Sophia only hugged her bear tighter. She was old enough to sense the weight of her mother's relief, but also young enough to see the hollowness in Victor's smile. Dr. Anika Rao did not clap, nor did she smile. She adjusted her glasses and spoke in the same quiet tone she had used since the beginning. Your generosity does not erase the evidence. The machine failed because of a hidden wound, and the wound was hidden because someone raised the sensor thresholds. A silence followed her words. Engineers shifted uneasily. Some would not meet her eyes. I have the logs, Dr. Rao continued. Incremental adjustments, always upward, over the course of weeks, and I have copies of correspondence. She lifted a folder of printed emails. The CTO authorized the changes to pass batch Q17 without triggering alarms. Heads turned toward the man in the tailored suit at the edge of the room. The chief technical officer, face taut, stepped forward. "This is slander," he snapped. "Routine calibrations. Nothing more." Dr. Rao opened the folder. "Your words, in writing, raise the acoustic gate to bypass hairline chatter. We cannot afford to fail inspection. Defense contracts depend on clearance. Signed, dated." Time-stamped. The room inhaled sharply as though a single lung. The CTO's eyes darted, searching for escape. Then he rallied, voice sharp as glass. "Do you think you can trap me with a few emails? This company belongs to Armand. No tribunal will risk his wrath. No commission will destroy a project of this scale. I will bury this before it breathes." He turned to Victor, as if expecting support. "Tell her. Tell them all." Victor's smile had gone brittle. For the first time, doubt shadowed his face. He saw the engineers watching, saw the dome that had finally triumphed, saw the little girl with the stethoscope who had captured more loyalty in a week than his fortune had in years. Dr. Rao closed the folder, drew out her seal, and pressed it to the logbook. The sound of wax snapping into place echoed like a verdict. "This is now official record," she said. "Public, immutable. It cannot be buried. It will stand in court, in commission, in history." The CTO's face blanched. His hand twitched, then dropped. Lucia drew her daughter close, whispering a prayer of gratitude. Sophia only stared at the scene with calm eyes. She did not fully grasp the weight of politics or contracts, but she understood something simpler. The truth had spoken, and it had been heard. Victor's shoulders straightened. He lifted his chin, forcing a smile once more. "Very well. Let it be public. The world will know who saved the sun, and who tried to silence it." But behind his smile, something darker flickered. A claw, half hidden, half bared. The dome had witnessed a miracle, but power does not surrender easily. Months passed, and the winter storms around Reykjavik softened into spring light. The Valhalla Ridge Dome no longer felt like a place of humiliation. It had become something different, a cathedral that remembered both arrogance and redemption. News of the 91st second spread like fire across the scientific world. Journals wrote of resonance dampened by copper sleeves, of a fracture exposed at 4.7 seconds. But what traveled further than equations was the image of a girl holding a patched bear, pressing a cracked stethoscope to a machine worth billions. Victor Armand made good on his promise. $300 million was transferred, debts erased, contracts reshaped. He did it publicly, not from kindness, but because the seal of Dr. Anika Rao left him no escape. Still, the money flowed, and with it came the possibility of something new. The possibility became a place. They named it the Vance Center for Intuitive Diagnostics, after Sophia's abuelo, who had once crouched in the snow and taught a child to listen to rails. It rose not in Reykjavik, but in a quieter corner of the United States, in a valley where work was scarce and schools had withered. The center's mission was simple: to honor the gift of listening, to teach that science was not only numbers, but also patience, intuition, and dignity. Lucia Morales, the janitor who once folded her rag in silence, was appointed operations director. She walked the halls with steady steps, her uniform replaced by a tailored coat. Yet she still carried the ritual of folding cloth, 2 neat squares before every meeting, her way of remembering where she came from. Sophia, still a child, became the center's first consultant of listening. She attended her classes like any other student, But after hours, she would sit with younger children, showing them how to place stethoscopes against pipes, rails, even trees, teaching them that the world speaks softly if you give it time. The patched bear rested on a shelf in her office, beside the old stethoscope. Both were relics, not of wealth, but of memory, reminding every visitor that miracles often arrive in humble cloth and worn brass. Dr. Rao remained a guardian. She ensured that new standards were written. No more raised thresholds without oversight. No more silenced voices in the name of contracts. What had been discovered at 4.7 seconds became a protocol taught in engineering schools across the world. And the CTO? He was suspended, pending investigation. His emails became exhibits in hearings that would stretch for years. Power clause at survival, but evidence, once sealed, has a way of outlasting clause. On the first anniversary of the 91st second, the dome lit again, not for a test, but for a ceremony. Engineers, students, and villagers gathered under the aurora. Sophia stepped forward, taller now, her hair brushed neatly by her mother's hand. She pressed her stethoscope gently to the steel casing of Lyra Delta. "It is happy now," she said. The crowd fell into a hush. For a moment, they all believed her. Lucia stood nearby, her rag folded once more into two perfect squares, pride softening the lines on her face. Dr. Rao signed the new charter of safety protocols, her pen scratching history into permanence. And Victor Armand, though still a billionaire, looked smaller in that moment, as though the dome itself remembered who had saved its heart and who had tried to silence it. The aurora danced outside, green ribbons across the sky. Inside, the hum of the machine was steady, like a fire burning low in a hearth. For the engineers, it was proof of triumph. For Sophia, it was a voice finally at peace. She touched the casing one last time, whispered so softly only her mother could hear. "Metal remembers, and now, so will we." Thank you for staying with us through this story. A story not only about machines and equations, but about listening, about dignity, and about the quiet courage of those the world often overlooks. If these hours warmed your heart, remember that knowledge, like fire, is meant to be shared, and sometimes the smallest voice can change the largest system. Until we meet again, may you carry warmth in the silence, and may you always find the courage to listen.